If you would have asked me 5 years ago what the on-trend brewing thing would be in 2021, I never would have guessed that hard seltzer water would be so popular. Laugh all you want, but hard seltzer is a fantastic day drinker and likely isn't going anywhere in the near future. Imperial Yeast's new seasonal strain, W04 Paramount, can help brewers get the most out of their seltzer fermentations. A clean and aggressive fermenter, Paramount will produce an excellent seltzer with low fusel alcohols, and it's produced in a gluten-free medium. If you've tried making seltzer with standard ale or lager strains, you know the struggle, and Imperial Yeast is here to help with W04 Paramount. Check it out at imperialyeast.com. Welcome to the Brew Lab. At the beginning of almost every brewery tour, there's some version of beer is made from malt water, hops, and yeast. The German influence on American brewing is real. I mean, the Reinheitsgebot obviously limits brewing in Bavaria, but are those really the only 4 ingredients that can be used in beer? Of course not. I'm your host, Cade Job, and today I'm in the lab speaking with Bernardo Guimaraes and Dr. Scott Lafontaine of the University of Arkansas, where they've studied malted rice as an ingredient in brewing. When most American brewers think of using rice in beer, they're thinking of making either American adjunct lager or increasing alcohol without adding aroma or flavor. I'd say that's a pretty traditional way of using unmalted rice in brewing, at least here in the United States, through something called a cereal mash, which we'll talk about in a bit. But there's a whole other world of alternative grains, as we've been talking about over the last few weeks with gluten-reduced brewing, and malted rice could play a fun new role in not just adding fermentable sugars, but also flavor and aroma. It could also be used without the additional processing step of a cereal mash, and in a twist, it might also provide some interesting new colors for beer as well. Well, Bernardo, as part of his PhD research, performed a screening of 19 globally diverse rice cultivars to assess their suitability for malting and brewing, and his major advisor, Dr. Scott Lafontaine, joins him today to talk about the future of using rice malt in brewing. If you haven't yet signed up to become a patron, please consider doing so. By becoming a patron of Brewlosophy, you get awesome rewards like access to Brewlosophy contributor recipes that we've never published, new discounts each month to YakimaValleyHops.com, and for $3, access to a monthly live Q&A session with a special guest from the brewing industry. Becoming a patron is easy. Once you've contributed at that $3 level or higher, you get access to the private Patreon Facebook page, where all of the previous Q&A sessions are available to watch, with guests like Vinny Chilurzo, John Palmer, and the Brewlosopher himself, Marshall Schott. And this month's guest is Brewlosophy contributor Alex Shanks-Abel. The self-described cheapskate brewer appeared on the Brewlosophy show and shared some of their tips and tricks for avoiding all of that expensive process and ingredient equipment. And they're also a wealth of knowledge about beer and brewing, so it should be another great Q&A session. All the information that you need to get access to this awesome resource is available at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, so go check it out. I want to pause again and say another big thank you to everyone who's left a rating or review of the show. These ratings are really meaningful, and I care immensely about how you like the show, and this is one of the easiest ways for me to hear from you. Every review helps us improve the show, like with the Applying the Science episodes, which wouldn't have happened if not for listener reviews. So if you haven't yet left a rating or review, please take a moment to help us out. All right, feedback this week is from listener Eric, who writes, "Hey, Cade, I was meaning to drop you a line after episode 131 last fall on growing and processing hops at home, but no time like the present. Hop plants are just starting to pop up out of the ground around this time of year, and it's the perfect time to keep something in mind that wasn't really mentioned in your show. Cutting back the growth on your hop hill to a few select bines is good, but you don't want to favor what they call bull bines. These are very strong growers, but the space between the sidearms can be as much as twice the normal spacing, which will significantly impact your yield. The advice I've heard is that once your hops are established after the first or second year, cutting back the initial growth to the ground in the spring will ensure that you don't get a bullbine on your trellis. I know it seems like the wrong thing to do when you first see them growing out of the ground to cut them off like that, but it seems to work. Rest assured there will be more shoots on the way, and they should give you more cones in the fall. I'm not a pro at this, but I bet you know people who are. It'd be interesting to hear how the professionals deal with this when they do it, and if this trimming of the initial growth approach is a bunch of bull." Thanks again, as always, for keeping the Brew Lab going strong. Hey, thanks, Eric, for writing in. Yes, it's absolutely something that the commercial brewers do. So they actually, of course, do two things, one of which we talked about the show. They look for a couple of the best bines, like you said, ones that are good growers, but not those bull bines that will reduce yield. And those are the only bines that they actually put on the trellis string to grow. So that selects for only a few good bines, and That's kind of part one of what they do. But you're right. There are some bines that have longer spaces between the sidearms, and that can cause problems and reduced yield. So yeah, they're not going to go through and measure every individual vine because that would take hours and probably be cost prohibitive, but they are going to sort of look at those bines and check the space between them. And then once they've gotten rid of the bull bines, which they'll either pull up immediately, cut down, or just push off to the side, they chemically then prune the rest. They pick good bines, run it onto the string, and then they chemically prune everything on the ground, which includes those bull bines. So just like you said, they get rid of all of those other bines so that the resources going into the ones on the string aren't wasted. It increases yield and helps the plant do its thing. And of course, you can try something similar at home. So yeah, you're looking for good growing vines as they come out of the ground. You're going to train those on the trellis and then trim back all of the other competitor vines, including those bull vines. Now, there's not really a good rule of thumb about spacing. Like, I can't give you a number of inches of spacing between the vines, but whenever you see like a really thick, really well growing vine that's got what looks like larger spaces than the other vines that are growing out of the ground, that's kind of one that you may want to pull back. Now, again, this is after a couple of years after your hops are entrenched, and don't worry, if you grow a bull vine, if you put it on your trellis, you're still going to get hops out of it. So they still grow vines, they just might not have as much yield as you want. For home brewers or people that are growing their hops at home, yield may not be a big concern, at least is not as much as it is for a commercial grower. So again, your mileage may vary. But thanks, Eric, for the feedback and comment, and I'll be back in a few minutes with Bernardo Guimaraes and Dr. Scott Lafontaine to talk about rice malt. One of the biggest improvements to my brewing practices was the upgrade to stainless steel, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which holds 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to reduce the chances of a messy blow-off, and it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brew systems out there, and their prices are remarkably affordable. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, you've got to check out deltabrewingsystems.com. We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brewlosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you Fargo? You can in the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Denim is in demand at Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston. Get cash on the spot for everything denim. Bring in your trendy and classic styles of gently used name brand denim. Get paid for your denim shorts, skirts, jackets, jeans, and more. We're looking for denim that is blue, black, or a bold color, and jeans in styles like mom jeans, bootcut, baggy, flared, and ripped. We want everything denim. Sell your denim for cash at Plato's Closet today. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
There are lots of different cereal grains that can be used to make beer, but barley has been the perennial grain of choice, largely because of historical precedent, but also because of its relative ease in malting. Grains like corn, rice, sorghum, etc. allegedly bring challenges that make them harder to use for maltsters and brewers. Today in the lab, I'm speaking with PhD candidate Bernardo Pontes Guimaraes and his advisor, Dr. Scott Lafontaine of the University of Arkansas, about rice malt. So Bernardo, welcome to the Brew Lab.
Oh, thank you, Cade.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have you here. And Scott, of course, welcome back.
It's great to be back.
I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about it. The rice malt is going to be, it's a fun one. It's one of those ingredients that I haven't heard of people brewing a lot with. Is Arkansas a big producer of rice?
Yeah, so Arkansas grows about 40% of the rice in the US. And it was one thing that really attracted me in terms of like an academic position, coming back to the US and establishing a program.
Yeah. So 40% of the U.S. rice is grown in Arkansas. That's surprising. I guess whereas the other was like Louisiana and sort of in that same area.
Yeah, so the southern region grows a lot, but California was a big player for a long time. The issue there was the drought really devastated California rice growing. They've had a really good year in terms of filling their aquifers. So maybe we'll see rice production grow, but that sustained drought for a long time really drove down production. And so Arkansas, took over some of that production. The thing is, Arkansas specializes on long grain rice, whereas California would be more medium short grain.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, awesome. And then, do you know? I mean, this is a question I'm not sure. Do you know how much of the rice that is produced is actually turned into rice malt? Is it a large percentage, small percentage? Any idea?
Very small percentage. I mean, there are some commercial examples of this, right? So Eckert malting in California would be an example. When Bernardo was recently at the Craft Malting Conference presenting this work, he ran into an individual that I think was in Ohio.
It was north of. There's a one because I think in the U.S. right now there are like three gluten-free malt houses. One being this one. There's one that I think it's opening that I think it's in Ohio, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Uh-huh.
That is also going towards that, but
yeah, I think
so. It's slowly growing, I think.
Yeah, in general, too, like this is would be like when we get further into the conversation, I think there's a lot of confusion too around utilization of rice malt versus using it as an adjunct. And even when we discuss this with brewers, because it's such a new concept of like the utilization of this grain, often the two get blurred together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I do have some questions, right? I have some questions. I mean, I think I'm familiar with an American style cereal mash. I mean, although we'll talk about that a little bit here too. But then I'm sort of interested, like, how does brewing with malted rice change, and can you malt rice, and all these sorts of questions, which I'm excited to get into. But before we do that, I do like to do those introductions. And so, Bernardo, I want to start with you. So you are a PhD candidate at the University of Arkansas, and I wanted to know, how did you become interested in studying brewing science?
So my undergrad, even like sort of my career has a little bit of like almost overlap with Scott's in that sense. It's quite interesting. So I'm also a chemist. So I did chemistry there in University of Brasilia in Brazil. And in the end of my my undergrad, I needed to do an internship, and we have a bachelor thesis as well, sort of like an honors. And I started working in beer then. And what attracted me most is because I wanted to do like work in a research, but also in something that would like really connected to the industry. So those were the two main things. I want something connected to industry and something that was not only chemist. So I wanted something that was as multidisciplinary as it could be. And brewing is the perfect setting for that. It has all those requirements that I had. And then I started there, really got into it. I loved it. So I pursued with my master's, in which I studied Brazilian hops. And now I'm doing, after that, I worked in a microbrewery in Brazil for 2 years. And then I came here to work with rice and rice malt at the University of Arkansas.
Ah, cool. That's exciting. So got into beer looking for that multidisciplinary aspect. I can totally understand that. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, what do you study? Are you a chemist? Are you a microbiologist? Are you a biochemist? Like, what are you? And there's so many different components of it that oftentimes I just say yes. Although I think, like you guys, I focus more on the chemistry side than on microbiology. But Scott, so you are actually an assistant professor in food chemistry. Congratulations. I think.
No, crazy.
I think since the last time you were on the podcast, you have landed an academic position at the University of Arkansas.
Yep. Yeah. So I forget where we chatted last. So in October of last year, I had moved from Germany. I was on a research fellowship at the Versuchs- und Lehrstoffe Brauerei, or VLB in Berlin, and I was working under Dr. Niels Retberg in their special analytics lab, working on beer flavor stability. A lot of cool projects came out of that. And then, fortunately, I was looking at academic positions, and this position at the University of Arkansas came up. And again, it attracted me because when I started to look at the agricultural products that were produced in Arkansas, I saw rice. And then the next thing I saw is, who's the biggest exporter of that rice? Anheuser-Busch, right? And so
Wow, yeah.
for me, like thinking about an academic position where I could pursue brewing science, an agricultural product that is related to brewing science, it was a perfect match. And just so happens, they had a brewing certificate program that they had launched pre-COVID. So they had gotten through like all the bureaucratic hurdles in the institution and were establishing this training program. And the way they established it here is like quite interesting. It's a 3-college program. We were just talking about that multidisciplinary nature of brewing. So the program here is housed in it's housed in food science, but we have an advisory board that sits in the College of Engineering and Fulbright, which represents our hard sciences like biology and chemistry, as well as Bumpers Ag, where food science sits. So really multidisciplinary approach to setting up our training program. And so I've taken that on as a co-director as well. But a lot of cool research, very fortunate to bring in, like creating a lab, right? You start to get into building this team, right? And that building of the team and bringing like folks like Bernardo in that have these skill sets that you need in the lab. And, it's like bringing in the Avengers to solve these beer-related problems, right? And, and I'm fortunate to have mentors like, Dr. Hildegard Heyman and, your advisor and my past advisor, Dr. Thomas Schellhammer, to like show me how to do that well and build that community. And hopefully, we're going to make great strides in elevating rice. And, so like the 2 projects we have are to like sort of elevate the utilization of rice right now and think of novel ways because, and we'll get into this later, but the way we see grains outside of barley is what I think is inferior, right? I don't know. There seems to be this trend right now in craft. Like people are starting to think like adjunct style lagers are cool. I don't know if you've seen that, but
yeah, for sure.
there's some momentum in that. But I still think like people think of it as adjunct, and we see as Americans beer through the Germanic lens, which I think is preposterous, and we sort of need to reorient what our thought is, particularly like if we have this local starch being grown in our country. And then the other thing is around like really thinking about ways to craft non-alcoholic beer so that it is tasty, and some other projects around that. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we're doing right now, and
nice.
It's fun.
Yeah, well, wow, that sounds like so much. And again, congratulations on landing that position. It sounds like it's perfect. And you're right. It is so true that American brewers at least look at beer often through the Germanic lens. But I've also often wondered, like, I wish we could take like a more Belgian lens, right? Which is just kind of like brew with things and make it taste good and make it taste good with food.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, the Belgians were the original craft brewers. And you look at World War I, right? They almost had to be because they're in the middle of this war. They don't have a great supply of raw ingredients, and they're having their equipment taken from them, right? Like,
yeah.
And so they're evolving to pressures because of that. But you look at a lot of styles, saison, all of these, and who knows if the origin was actually in France or Belgium, but like. In that area, I think there's a hotbed of creativity. And I think that I agree with you in terms of like, that's what's fun about it. And not to say like brewing under the Reinheitsgebot and having a tradition and a fine product is good, but when I look at the definition of beer and look to see what these grains, alternative grains, can do to the profile of beer, it is actually lovely, right? I mean, no one would argue that well-defined adjunct lager isn't a delicious product and would most certainly be defined as beer, right?
Yeah, for sure. Totally. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of American adjunct lager. You know, I mean, it is funny, and I'll say this even on air. People always ask me like, what's my favorite beer? And I'll usually say, well, the one I drink the most is the one that my son would pull out of the refrigerator if I told him, my 5-year-old, if I told him, go get a beer for me out of the fridge, it's the one that he would bring me. And that's a pub beer from Tin Barrel, which is American adjunct lager. And it's basically just like a Bud Light or Busch Light with a little bit of extra hops in it. So, you know, I mean, it's a light American adjunct lager. And so we're going to talk a lot about rice and how that's used. And rice is often used in American adjunct lagers. But the study that we're looking at today was you guys' exploration of rice malt. So you took 19 different globally diverse cultivars of rice and investigated them for their malting and brewing qualities. So I want to start jumping into that research. And first of all, ask, why rice malt? Like why look into malting rice in usage for brewing?
So one thing about like the utilization of a malt, right, is that product, you have the enzymes there, right? It's a solution that is approachable from a craft brewer perspective, right? And we now have 9,000 craft brewers in the nation. And if we have in confined varieties that have high enough DP for self-saccharification, right? You don't need necessarily an extra vessel to be using this raw material, right? You don't need an adjunct cooker. So, you know, right off the start, that provides a benefit to a lower, folks that might not have the resources to put in a CapEx expense to bring in a new raw material.
Yeah, or like the expense, like a cereal cooker, right? To bring in a separate vessel to be able to get at the starches in those malts. And I want to get into that in just a second, but there was one other thing in your paper that you guys mentioned was, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, especially we talked about climate change and barley on episode 140 with Dr. Harmony Bettenhausen and Dr. Campbell Morrissey. And they were talking about how barley's going to change in the future, right? It's going to, as climate change becomes more and more, as climate change continues, we'll say it like that, barley is going to have increased pressures, and we could see increased protein content and things like that as it changes. And so rice, or having something else, an alternative grain like malt, improves the supply chain, which takes some of the pressure off of barley, but it also offers alternative ingredients. And you guys mentioned that in the paper a little bit too.
Yeah. So for example, as you mentioned, has been some studies sort of projecting a global decrease in the barley yield, going like from a drop between 3 and 17%. So it is very pronounceable in that sense. And if you look for rice, the projections are something in between increasing 1% or decreasing 3%, so way more stable. So that's one huge advantage as well. And because then you can have another source for your malt, like you have another tool especially thinking long term, right? So, because then this is really new, so we're going to probably talk about that, but there's a long way to improve. There's a lot of room for improvement there, but it is already like thinking long term is a great alternative as well to give to brewers.
And I'll add to that too, right? So, you know, when we look at Asia, right? Asia is already, utilizing rice in a high amount. And again, you have high production of rice in Asia. And so, exploring this potentially also, could be leveraged not in just the US, but in other local brewing communities around the world. And just like thinking about it, this grain, right? You have a tropical grain already that can handle high heat. And the other thing that we'll get into is gelatinization, right? We were talking with some folks in the malt industry, and what we see basically is gelatinization of barley is also increasing, right? That I've heard up to like 65 in some varieties. So that's a hurdle that's also going to impact barley too. But we'll talk about that shortly and why that's important.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into getting at that starch that's present in rice. I mean, you mentioned the use of the cereal cooker, those sorts of equipment, capex expenditures that a lot of breweries may not be able to do. And I think first of all, I would normally start here like at sort of a high level question, but I think we can move past one really quickly in that rice has starch and can be used to make beer, right? I think we can sort of all agree that
Right.
is accurate, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And in an equivalent amount, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Like right now, we have another master's project that is evaluating just how you change. Like we don't necessarily have the best even knowledge about rice variety and how much extract you can get from a rice variety right now. And so we have a student that's looking at 170 different rice varieties or just different treatments and how much extract you can just get from a rice cultivar. So we're building our knowledge also on that. But I would say, anywhere from 80 to 100% is what we're seeing.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's interesting. That's really fascinating. I'm interested to see that, like, what the results are of that, to see, can you get the same amount of extract from rice as barley, or at least, the same percentages or things? And I have some questions about that in terms of this research, but that sort of leads me to one of the other questions is like, does rice have the same starches that barley does? I mean, is it composed of the same things? It seems like, okay, you can make it to use beer, but is it compositionally similar?
Yeah. So the starches are similar in that sense. So both of them having being a very long chain of glucose. Of course, they have their individualities as well. So different quantities of amylopectin, for example, the relationship between amylopectin and amylose would be different between the two. But overall, when it comes like going down to the starch quality, they're pretty similar. The rice has a broader variety to that relationship compared to barley. So you can have also like different outcomes because of that.
Yeah, like that, and I guess that kind of makes sense. I think Pat Hayes had mentioned too that like no barley, no beer, no beer, no barley, right? And so he was saying that like that last part, no beer, no barley. Barley's been bred over at least the last 100 years, almost exclusively for brewing use. So it kind of makes sense that we've sort of narrowly tailored these varieties of barley and we set up these malting quality parameters. But that doesn't currently exist for rice, does it? This like narrow tailoring and breeding of variety.
No, not at all, right? And so that's why a study like this is important, right? We can show efficacy. We can see if there is a there, which, in the study, I think we find varieties that, one, are self-saccharifying, and two, have great potential from a number of different chemical perspectives. And you'll hear later on that we brew with some of these, and they have interesting flavor too. So now what this opens the opportunity for is to start that breeding effort if there's interest, right? And like nowadays with GM technology, like say, for example, we could maybe combine what we find here in rice over into barley. Like maybe that's a potential in the future. But I mean, obviously that would take some work and identification of the particular genes of interest. But
sure, sure,
possible.
Or even vice versa, right? Some of the characteristics that we like in barley, moving those over into rice, that would be really interesting. And so, one of the differences and one of the challenges of using rice up to this point is something that you already mentioned earlier, Scott, and that was this concept of gelatinization. So let's talk really quick about that. What is gelatinization, and why does it matter when we're talking about brewing with rice?
So gelatinization is important because in the grain, the rice is in its crystalline form, and then for it to be fully used by the enzymes, they need to be liquefied, and that's for that, the water basically needs to go into that structure and disrupt it. And then it goes into the solution, and the enzymes can do what we want them to do, which is basically to chop it up so we can have our materials for the yeast to then consume, thrive, and make some alcohol if that's desired. So,
and just to set some temperature guidelines here, right? Because I think that's important to think about where gelatinization happens in rice versus barley, and where we're thinking about our brewer's window, and just to orient ourselves to that while we get into this discussion, right? So, generally speaking, onset in barley of gelatinization, that liquefaction, it's probably happening somewhere around 55 or, somewhere around there. And then, that it's not all the starch gets liquefied. It's this bell curve, right? So 55 to 65, let's say, and that's increasing as climate change, it gets warmer, right? And then with rice, we have anywhere probably from onset, let's say 65, and that could go all the way up to 80, but it's very variety dependent. So we think of rice being, all the time you have to boil to liquefy, but really some varieties are down in that kind of barley range.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it seems like there is some crossover there, right? I mean, as I'm thinking about a mash, right? Mash temperature of like 65 Celsius, that normal, 152 Fahrenheit Celsius, or I'm sorry, 152 Fahrenheit, 65 Celsius, that normal mash temperature. It sounds like some of these malted rice varieties might have, or some of these rice varieties might be able to actually, do their thing if they had those enzymes present. And I think that's kind of a key here, too, is one of the things that may be different, if I understand you correctly, between rice and at least barley or malted barley is that, well, I'll ask this as sort of open-ended. How do brewers get at that starch in malted barley, and how is that different or similar in rice? Like what, the mash is the key component there that brewers are using malted barley to do, but are those enzymes present in rice and in that way?
So the enzymatic profile is quite interesting, right? So we have diastatic power, right? And the way in which we describe diastatic power is we have our amylases, right? We have alpha amylase and beta amylase, right? Alpha amylase is going to sort of, in a top view perspective, right? We're creating long chain dextrin, right? Just chopping that starch randomly. Whereas beta amylase is going to come from the non-reducing end of the starch and create maltose, which then yeast leverages and eats and creates alcohol, right? Which creates euphoria as well as a great dry character in the beer.
Exactly.
And as brewers, right, we manipulate that, right? Alpha amylase is going to be on that higher end of that brewer's window, right? Let's say 65 to 72. And on the lower end, we're going to be anywhere from like 55, let's say, to 62 for beta amylase, right? And so we can adjust fermentability of our wort, with barley mashes by tooling our mash temperature. Now, what's really interesting for these rice malts is that we don't necessarily have high DP in the traditional sense. But as we start to look at other enzymes that are pretty important from a mash perspective, we see through the roof levels of limit dextrinase and possibly AMG, which I'll let Bernardo get into.
Yeah. So, and the difference that makes in this different enzyme profiles, because then also leads to different meshing profiles, because the meshing is really just a function of the enzymes that we're trying to maximize. Right. So as he was mentioning, if we want alpha go higher, beta go lower into that temperature range. But for rice, since there's a much higher amount of other enzymes that's not done in barley, it also means different mesh profile it's necessary. So for example, two enzymes that are really interesting because they're really present in the rice malt, but in the barley, they're pretty neglectable, are alpha glucosidase and amyloglucosidase. both enzymes, they create glucose. So, and they work at about 50 C, which would be 122 in Fahrenheit. So it's a much lower temperature, meaning also like to better utilize this product, you also need then to have, instead of holding the temperature at higher temperature, holding a higher temperature for longer, as we normally do for barley, that would have been at this lower range. Because then you better utilize these enzymes for to have glucose, and also the limidextrinase. Limidextrinase, it cleaves the 1,6 bond. That's the one especially useful because it makes dextrins, right? So with that, you create longer chains, which can then be chopped up to better utilization from alpha or beta
amylases. Oh, interesting. Okay, but if I understand, so then the temperature is a lot lower on those, or for those enzymes, or the optimal temperatures are a lot lower. How does that jive with the gelatinization? So if the gelatinization of rice is higher, how do you get access and use those enzymes?
So this is a really interesting question, and so the way that we the instrumentation for viewers that aren't necessarily in science, we use what is called differential scanning calorimetry, and what we can do is look at the energy that is spike that occurs when the starch liquefies, and so that device basically. What you do is you increase the temperature in that device at a degree per minute over a set period of time. And then you can see this spike occur, when the starch starts to liquefy and gelatinize. And normally, right, you just do that degree per minute. But what we did was use this instrument as a mini masher, right? So we brought it up to 50 and held it for 30 minutes, right? Kind of untraditional approach. And some of the starch chemists that we work with here at the university were like, I don't know, but like as brewers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. Of course.
And what you see is basically as you start to do that, you hold at, let's say, 40, like between 40 and 55 for 30 minutes, and then 60, 65, we almost see a 6-degree change. It's about 6 degrees in onset and gelatinization. We're not sure why that's happening, but essentially that lower hold of mash temp basically is lowering onset of gelatinization.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, kind of a head scratcher, right?
Yeah.
We've got some experience to probe why that's the case. And what we think is that debranching is occurring pre-gelatinization, full gelatinization, and maybe speeding that up. But we're exploring that right now.
Interesting, and that's in the malted rice, right? So so some debranching is happening at 50 Celsius, well below that gelatinization temperature, which I think you talked about was like 65 to 80 Celsius.
That's correct.
Oh, yes. Fascinating. That's really interesting. So, and so that was going to be one of my questions was we're trying to, get at this starch in rice, and gelatinization is an important component of that. And so I was going to ask if malted rice still requires a cereal mash. Like, are you still going to have to, get up to those high, like let's say worst case scenario, 80, 85 Celsius temperatures to get access to those starches?
So great question. And what we did, like the paper that you have and that you'll post, what we did is leverage that to select things to brew with. And, I know Bernardo is chomping at the bit to sort of talk about that, but that's been like his next 2 months. And the next paper will be sort of on this, what we'll discuss right now. But, Bernardo, if you want to share a little bit about that. Particularly the self-saccharification nature. I think that's a good segue.
Yeah. So in this study, we did a shorter and a more traditional approach. So instead, and in that study, we already found like 3 varieties that could self-sacharify, which was already interesting because it meant that like they all saccharified up to 72 Celsius. So still lower than like without a need for a cereal cooker. And then in the methods that we did after, better utilizing those enzymes, increasing the time for them to be active, we saw that out of 11 varieties, 10 were able to self-saccharify.
Wow.
So it's a really neat finding, I would say. So it's really that kind of approach. It's sort of thinking this is not barley, this is something else. And so it requires another approach to it. It's not the same thing, therefore we need to treat it as such.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. We need to treat it differently, but it still could be used on the same equipment, like it sounded like at those temperatures, right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think is super cool about it. It just changes the mindset of how we, it's not out of the question. We have these infusion masses already. All right, we're just going to do a lower hold with this material, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? It just changed the hold or the temperatures that you're at, and then you've got something, new that you can brew with. You've now got a new ingredient. You didn't have to add anything to your brewery or really change any of the processes that you're uncomfortable with. Brewers are very comfortable, especially ones that are doing protein rests and, step mashes and decoction and all that sort of stuff. I mean, this adds, maybe not decoction. Let's leave that aside because that is kind of boiling some things. But, protein and step mashes that where you're controlling the temperature and moving it up at a regular pace, right? These are things that brewers are comfortable with.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's why, originally, like going in, I don't know, we didn't necessarily know what to expect. And so I think, part of this, and just seeing the efficacy of this, again, I think the reason why this hasn't been explored as much is because we've been blinded by the German influence of what actually beer is, right? Beer has to contain barley. But, in my definition of beer can just be a malted grain. I mean, I think malting has to go into the definition of beer, but or maybe not, right? Like as we seek to create more sustainable products. But I think that fits in my definition of this, and it's been fun to explore and actually even refine my own definition of that in these studies.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about, malted rice, is that basically the same thing as malted barley? Like, what's the difference there? If we're just talking about starch, maybe it's just slightly different. Do we need to redefine it as its own, call it adjunct anymore, or is it just beer at this point? That's interesting. And one of the questions that I think a lot of people had, and what I've heard often, is that, or one of the reasons why malted rice may not have been explored as much is because of some of the difficulties that are associated with malting it and then brewing it and all that sort of stuff. And I want to talk about that right after we get back from the break. But first, I wanted to introduce, just really quickly, you guys' experiment, what you guys looked at. So you malted 19 different cultivars of rice, and then assess them for those different qualities, right? Like moisture, protein, nitrogen, fan, gelatinization, all that stuff. And then also brewing qualities too, like how much extract you get out of them, and actually brewed some wort. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. And was really nice to see even like those results, because they were all promising. Kind of what we were talking just before. We have been breeding barley just for those malting qualities for over and over again over millennia. And rice, we have been breeding just to have increased yields. So we can already see how those rice varieties have good results. And for that, we got those varieties all grown here in the US, some from origins like from Japan, Brazil, the Philippines, the US as well.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there. It's fun because, shaking up an industry a little bit, and how people right now, we're kind of newbies, and so some of the ideas we're having, like, oh, what? But yeah, sure, we'll support you. So the rice, right? That came from the USDA Rice Center down in Stuttgart, So the rice breeding for the entire U.S. that happens in Arkansas at that USDA center, and then the University of Arkansas also has a rice research center that is there. And so we worked with the breeders here to get some of their new varieties. They have some aromatic varieties that are pretty fun. Some mainstays. And then we actually worked outside the institution with LSU on this as well to get one of their varieties. So ton of support like from the industry. And then a lot of the brewing trials, what we did for the Maltaine, we didn't have the ability to do that here yet at the U of A, but we worked with, due to my relationship with the VLB, they ran sort of the brewing and some of the Congress trials. And that what's great is that's already established sort of this multinational feel to this project.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Using global cultivars, but also having participation from international partners like the VLB and then also LSU, the USDA. It's really cool. And it is, like you said, there's some new concepts that we're exploring here, right? Using and malting rice and then using it to brew beer. And I want to talk about how you malt rice and some of the challenges. But first, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. More Beer's slogan is absolutely everything for homebrewing, and it's easy to see why, given their selection of over 8,000 products, like the BrewBuild X3 Uniconical Stainless Steel Fermenter, or the Cosmos series of kegerators that give you everything you need to get started with dispensing and serving your homebrew. For quality fermentations, More Beer carries a variety of yeast and nutrients from the likes of Imperial Yeast, White Labs, and Cellar Science. More Beer offers free shipping on most orders over $59, and they also have a killer YouTube channel featuring brewing tips, hijinks, and awesome gear giveaways. Check out everything More Beer has to offer at morebeer.com.
I'm a trauma surgeon at Rhode Island Hospital.
I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician.
I'm the pediatric trauma coordinator.
We see impaired driving crashes every day.
Children who are victims of impaired driving.
Sometimes they're comatose, sometimes they're screaming.
Broken limbs with exposed bones.
Severe pelvic injuries, head trauma.
I actually get angry because it's preventable.
Makes me feel heartbroken. It makes me feel sick.
Don't drive drunk. Don't drive high.
A message from the Injury Prevention Center at Rhode Island Hospital and the Rhode Island Department of Transportation.
Denim is in demand at Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston. Get cash on the spot for everything denim. Bring in your trendy and classic styles of gently used name brand denim. Get paid for your denim shorts, skirts, jackets, jeans, and more. We're looking for denim that is blue, black, or a bold color, and jeans in styles like mom jeans, bootcut, baggy, flared, and ripped. We want everything denim. Sell your denim for cash at Plato's Closet today. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Hey y'all, Darius Rucker here. A lot of people ask me, what inspires your music? And one of the big things is a strong sense of place. That's why I love my home state of South Carolina and want to share the awesome things it has to offer. From the beautiful mountains down to the sunny coast, it's got it all. Not to mention two of my personal favorites, great golf and amazing food. Come see why I love this place. Visit discoversouthcarolina.com.
It's no secret that I'm a fan of crushable, drinkable beer styles, and I've even mentioned it earlier on the show. So the first thing I think of when I think of rice and brewing is American-style adjunct lager. Have either of you either tasted an example of a commercial beer that's brewed with rice malt? Is this out and commercially available yet? I
haven't tried one yet. I found some that used rice malt and rice malt and millet malt.
Yeah.
So the conjunction of both, but I have not yet tried one of those. It's really, at least like in here, I couldn't find one yet, but I'm really eager to try those.
Yeah,
those beers.
I guess it's gluten-free places that you'd have to look at, right? But as I've seen, most of the gluten-free beers have like sorghum or millet or buckwheat or something else along with rice that's been added to it.
Exactly, and to be honest, what's really interesting to me of like why folks have not looked at rice previously, I know it's a smaller kernel and we'll kind of get into malting difficulties, but if you think about the grains that you just talked about, millet, sorghum, talk about grains that come in with an impactful flavor, right? I don't know if I've had sorghum beers, I've not had rice malt beers, but man, what a flavor profile that's distinct and sometimes hard to get over. It's really defining, personally.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a flavor associated with millet that I'm very familiar with, right? That's this like this tang sort of sour note to it, almost like sourdough bread versus regular bread. Whenever I think of millet, totally. And so, did you guys try any of the experimental beers that you brewed with rice malt?
Yes. So out of the 11, we ran a sensory analysis on that.
Oh, cool.
And it was really interesting to see how they varied like completely from variety to variety. We had one that was more cereal-like, so really interesting in that sense. Others bringing some interesting new flavors as well. So having that novelty quality that especially like craft brewers enjoy, because then you get to make something new, something different. So yeah, so we tried.
Yeah.
But one other thing about that too is some are just neutral.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you're looking for a starch source that isn't necessarily definitive, right? Like, and so that neutrality, like, yeah, we're finding some cool, unique novel sources, but like in this in terms of a fully gluten-free alternative, I mean, it's amazing, right? In terms of some of the performance that we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I think about malt, right? The malting process for barley, it's obviously, doing the germination step, getting the enzymes prepped and ready to go, but there's kilning that's associated with it too. And that's flavor, and they're adding flavor in. So I've got questions about this with rice malt too, and kilning and adding flavor. Can you get flavor to it? Because, American adjunct style lager, the rice is really just in there as a clean, neutral source of sugar, right? For fermentation, not to add much, maybe to thin out the body just a little bit, but certainly not to add any overwhelming flavors. But why not? Maybe rice malt would be good. And so I'll ask you guys some of those questions. But first, I wanted to talk about like malting rice. One, how do you do it? What are the difficulties associated with it? That's one of the things I've heard is that maltsters typically don't like to malt rice because of challenges. And I don't necessarily know what those challenges are, or even if that's a realistic fear, or something that maltsters are even worried about. So tell me, how do you malt rice, and what are those challenges?
So the malting procedure for rice is similar to barley when it comes to the overall scheme. So also steeping, germination, and then kilning. The germination, the optimum temperature, it's a little bit higher than used for barley. So barley is about 16 C, and for rice is closer to 28. So it's a warmer temperature. And also when it comes to the difficulties, one that I would like to mention, I think is probably because the rootlets, they just grow more than what's seen in barley.
Yeah.
So that could be one. But
one other thing to add on that too, we have smaller kernels, so the water uptake takes a little bit longer. In this study, there was a group in Italy that was sort of working on malted rice. Nobody really has probed this from a research perspective outside. Like, there's one study that was done by Giuseppe Prezzetti's group in Italy, and then there is some work that was done in TU Munich on that was an Indian variety. Yeah. So there's like two papers. Two groups, and then Giuseppe Prezzetti's group has like 3 published papers or manuscripts on it. So they did an optimization trial, and what we did, we didn't really want to go through that because they had kind of already optimized it. So we used their parameters, optimized for the VLB malt house, and then just tried to see, like, our goal was to see if there are varieties here that we should be looking at first before, let's say, we optimize. But that water uptake takes a little bit longer because we have smaller kernels. So we have a longer steeping time. But that could potentially be optimized like as you move into commercial maltings,
Sure, yeah. And I mean, commercial maltings are set up for barley, right? To do that. Do you have to have another CapEx there for like malting rice? Or can you still use the same equipment that you would use for malting barley?
You could use the same equipment as for malting barley. And for example, in our study, this approach also used like a light kilning, because it's really like sort of to preserve the enzymes. But same as with barley, you can also like play with kilning a little bit, getting more flavor out of it. And the price for that is just having lower enzymes.
Yeah, but you can. There's a whole study here to make specialty rice varieties too.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah,
we haven't played with that, but I know like if you go to Eckert Malt, there are some commercial specialty rice malts that do exist. One thing, like, we need to scale this up and get this in a pilot scale because grading size and all of that, like, really thinking to commercialize this, can we do this in a commercial barley malting plant, or would you want to, if you wanted to have the gluten-free aspect of it? So you might have to go and specifically be in a gluten-free malt house. But these are some things that we're exploring right now, sort of the challenges as we upscale this, because this study was really done on a lab scale, and just I want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Yeah, sure, right. Well, and that makes sense, right? Like you're screening 19 varieties, so there's no way to do 19 different full scale mashings and all this stuff. And like you mentioned, Scott, the optimization was handled sort of by the Italian group that was looking into that. But you guys did end up actually malting these 19 different varieties of rice, and then you brewed with them. And so I want to sort of talk through some of those results about like what you found. Can these varieties of rice be used for malt? Are they good? Are they as good as barley? How do they compare? So I'm not sure exactly where to start. I mean, I know in your manuscript you guys started with some of the malting qualities for rice. I don't know if it makes sense to start there, or brewing qualities, or what you guys think.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like we could start with malting loss. I just want to name drop, and then I'm going to pass over to Bernardo to jump in. But Florian Trinkle at the VLB, super influential, and was the lead manager over there. So I just want to make sure his name gets mentioned on this, and was just a great partner, sort of managing the malting trials over there. And like we went back and forth a lot to get this going. So I just want to make sure he gets mentioned in this, and then Bernardo can start to get into sort of the challenges with malting loss, or not challenges, but at least a comparison.
Yeah. So as we're saying, the malting losses, same with almost everything. We had these 19 varieties, all very different from all aspects that we could do, and the results also show a little bit of that. So for example, malting losses, they were between like 9 and 19%. And for barley, it's normally about like 10% in total. So some being similar, slightly lower, others being higher. And again, this goes both with some optimizations, because as we were talking before, we're dealing with 19 here. So we're just screening. So it's really like sort of a shotgun approach, everybody treated the same. And same with barley, and we can ask to every malter that like different barleys, they do different things. If you treat them all the same, you will not get the best results that you could have.
Mm-hmm. Well, now,
so that is one.
Can I ask, what is malting loss? What is that?
So malting loss is basically the mass that you lose through the process. So because you have a little bit of loss due to respiration, and also a little bit due to the rootlet that we were talking before. So when the grain's growing, it develops a rootlet that during kilning and sieving, we take that off. So those two components, they make up for the total malt loss.
And ways that we can improve that in the future, let's say, maybe we don't want the rice to use its own nutrient. So we put a little nutrient into the steeping water, for example, or maybe we help with water uptake by agitation, or thinking of ways that you could speed that water uptake up, and maybe, let's say, prevent some of that rootlet from forming.
And then another important aspect, especially when we're talking about rice and rice usage, because as we were talking before, like it's normally used with milled rice, white rice, right? So that's what it's conventionally used, especially in mainstream beers, but also in some crafts. But what's interesting to see, because when we're malting, we use the whole grain. So we have the white, we have also the bran, and we have the whole. So everything's in there. Same as in barley, it's completely intact from the beginning. And with brings to that, because then the protein levels is also it's also present. And it was really interesting to see because some rice varieties, they had similar amounts to barley. So ranging roughly at 10%. So that is something really mind-blowing for most people, because for you to think that rice has the same percentage of protein as barley does,
this is a really important point, and a super important distinction. And even with mainstay brewers that we've had and been talking about this with, they're like, what, rice with protein? And it's like, yeah, we haven't removed the bran. And so it is there. And so say you are making, let's say, a 30% adjunct lager, and you need some yeast nutrient there. Well, one, you could use this material. It's got that protein there. It's got that rice husk to make sure that you're still getting the filtration you need. And it's got some extra enzyme capacity, right? So from a flavor perspective, if it doesn't have too much of an impact, you just get the best bang for your buck there, right? You don't need to get nutrient anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't need extra nutrient. You don't need to worry about the filtration, right? For the filtration issues associated with rice and using that. Yeah, that's interesting. And that's cool. Yeah, think about it. You're using the whole grain. The husk is all there. Everything is there. The bran is there. The protein. And I'm guessing with that protein, maybe a little bit better foam retention or head retention too.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, all right. So there's a little bit higher malting loss, but it has similar protein content as barley. What other malting qualities are important?
So another one that's really interesting is the extract.
Okay.
Right. So that's roughly how much out of the grain makes into the wort. So, and then for barley, you have normally 78, 80%. And what we saw in rice is that value could reach 72%. So it's a really high value, especially considering, one, we didn't have the best meshing procedure for this. We could optimize as we did in the trials after when more varieties were saccharified. So that's one point important to highlight. And two, as we're mentioning, we never bred rice for this, so they were just sort of laying around with these good malting qualities. So could also be improved, but 70 is already a very good.
And one important feature, because we're also working with the economists right now around sort of this, and that is when we think about the agronomics of barley, right, per acre, right. Rice yields almost 3x more than barley, right? So when you think about a percentage of extract actually from a plot of land, potentially you're getting much more extract just because of the overall yield, right? So, as a brewer, you think, okay, that material is whatever percentage less, right? If you're getting 73 and you're normally getting 78, 5%. But to be honest, that could just be made up on the field as well, right? And so having that circular understanding has been super cool for me because, I wouldn't have necessarily considered that. So it was a great idea. We just recently heard.
I see that also then as a cost issue, right, or a cost savings, right? Because I would think if the farmer is able to produce 3x, on the field, some of that cost savings is going to get passed down to the brewer, right? And it's not going to. I mean, surely the farmer would love to pocket all that, but market forces are going to drive something there where the cost is going to help out in that way too, from a brewer's perspective. So so similar protein and sounds like similar extract, although a little bit lower, but again, not optimized malting procedure and not optimized breeding for those particular characteristics that we're looking for, like extract potential in barley. So that's really interesting and sort of really, promising for rice varieties as you're doing this. And then there was one other thing too that I've always heard about with rice, and Scott, you mentioned it earlier, but it's this concept of diastatic power, right? And then if you're using just regular rice and even adding that in through, you have to add it in through a cereal mash so that you're gelatinizing and getting all the rice available for the enzymes to work at. But the enzymes are coming from barley. That rice is not bringing any enzyme power to the beer. What about the malted rice? Are they, you mentioned that they are bringing enzyme power, but how does that relate to malt, to barley?
So if we analyze the static power as we do for barley, rice has a lower DP overall, but if you sort of like change your lens and, for example, compare to other gluten-free materials, then it's through the roof. So from a gluten-free perspective, it's a really, really high DP.
Okay.
So, because that's also something that we can, again, sort of like thinking with this now barley approach, it has lower than barley, but more than, for example, most of the gluten-free alternatives.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. And also too, you mentioned, I think if I understood your language, you said something very specific there. It was if we measure diastatic power as we measure in barley. And I think that was a really important distinction, right? Because diastatic power in barley is looking at those amylase enzymes, which you mentioned earlier that the limit dextranase and amyloglucosidase are much higher in rice. And those enzymes might potentially accomplish the same results, or at least make things accessible for amylase and beta amylase. So we may be, I guess, this is sort of me commenting, and I'll phrase it as a question. Is there an opportunity to change the way that we measure diastatic power for rice? Or, how's that impacting our extract?
Yeah, I think like one thing that was really interesting about this is because like we were seeing sort of extract correlating to limit dextranase, and even there's some studies that show that for barley too. So Bernardo, what was that paper?
Yeah, that was a paper from, I don't remember their name right now. It's from like the thing like late 80s, but they saw a correlation between the limit dextranase in barley, also with the extract more than the amylases themselves. So they, even in barley, they have shown that way back. But since I think it's mostly because most of it's lost during kilning in barley, so it does not survive the malting process. It's probably like maybe like being neglected or something. So just not study as much. But rice, these enzymes, they do survive the malting process and the impact. So that was also really interesting to see, especially as we're talking like about breeding for that, because then we started having like some places to start looking for.
Yeah. And, traditionally, like I think that the key there is amylase, and amylase is critical, right, to break down starch. And I want to make sure that we're clear on that. Like you have to have that. But I think what we're seeing is that these other enzymes sets the stage for the limited amount of amylase that we might have, and creates, let's say, an optimum environment for that protracted amount that we're seeing. Now, as we explore this further, we can continue to boost that. But to get back to your question in terms of like the measurement, like we have ways where we can already be looking at specific enzymes. And so for this, right, we're using enzyme kits to do that. And so, we're measuring exactly, or, to the best of our ability, because sometimes, some enzymes show in the same method, but, for limit dextranase, we're measuring how much is there specifically for that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's true, right? We don't necessarily need to change to diastatic power measurement. We just need to report for rice the limit dextranase and amyloglucosidase, because that's going to be just as important as the amylase diastatic power measurement.
Yeah, just adding those two figures on along with the amylases and understanding that, right? It's the whole the collection of that. And
yeah, the collection of the enzyme package, because the limit dextranase won't make maltose, right? It won't do it. It's just going to chop off, that 1,6 linkage, the debranching areas. So yeah, that's a really key and important point that we don't want to lose. Okay, so that was sort of the malting qualities of rice. What about like sort of those the wort production or brewing qualities? Anything there that was interesting?
So for the wort, one thing that is really nice, for example, some of the varieties had purple brand, so are like those purple rices, and it was really nice to see because, for example, they had they give off this reddish or purple wort colors.
Oh, wow.
So really neat to see. So that would be one thing that was really interesting from a brewing perspective. There's some others that we can explore later on once we can scale up, like the filtrability. It could have been good, or the viscosity was lower than is normally seen in barley. So that's another sort of like promising results that we can further explore after upscaling, because then we can see that like, okay, now that we have this larger amount that we can play with, how does that operates? So those were some also like other promising results from a brewing.
Yeah, I like and those characteristics in that pigmented rice. I mean, it looks like a rosé, right? So
really
it's
cool.
amazing. And the other feature about that, it's a new novel gluten-free coloring, right? So like, the potential's to me really high right there. And in the flavor, these sensory trials that we just did, like one was a little bit of a stinker. It had a phenolic character, but the other two had a little bit of a fruity character to them. That you have that antioxidant capacity from the anthocyanins, which are, the phenolics that are leading to
this
color. And we haven't measured them specifically, and we don't necessarily know yet the entire stability of them, but they make it through fermentation, and for sure they're there. Like I've been talking with some folks that work with blue corn, and it doesn't necessarily work, but at least with these pigmented rice varieties, we see translation all the way through from grain all the way to finished product.
That's amazing. So there's even a little bit of antioxidant capacity too that you're adding there, and that color is really fun too, right? I mean, I guess none of them are really like they're purple grains, but they're not producing like a purple beer, are they? But like you said, that rosé, that sort of like ruby red color, like bright, brilliant red.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And it's also nice because it has also the healthy benefits of it, right? Like we're still consuming these healthy components that are found in rice. So it's also nice from that perspective.
Yeah, because like one thing here, we're exploring this. Like, so in that brewing trial, we should have prefaced, like a lot of the beers that we were making, we're making NA here. It just makes sort of the studies that we do easy. And for me, like if you can make a good NA, or you can understand sort of the characteristic differences between these cultivars and NNA, it's going to be translatable when you increase Plato. That differentiation is going to just become more pronounced. And as we learn to use it in, let's say, maybe a harder matrix, we as brewers then can just like take what we learn and implement that. So, a big focus of ours is non-alcoholic beer, as that sector is like really exploding right now. And again, thinking about sort of like some of these characteristics on those products, some novel mouthfeel, some novel color, some health benefits, all kind of check the box.
Yeah, that's really exciting to think about, right? I mean, and not just, brewing with this as beer, but brewing with it non-alcoholic, but the like you just said, novel color, some novel mouthfeel, some novel flavor characteristics. I mean, it's really a new ingredient to maybe not new is the right word, but it's really it's a differentiating ingredient that you might be able to use and add into your beers to make your beer stand out. I mean, that was one of the things that Bart Watson just said at CBC, right? Is that craft breweries with 9,000 breweries, you can't just make great beer anymore. You have to make differentiating beer, and you've got to make beer that appeals to new consumer markets and all that stuff. So that was kind of cool.
I would add on to that too, like, we care about locality, right? So Yeah, at the start, we started talking about the difference between, barley and rice, right? And as let's say the climate becomes intolerable to grow this barley in the US, or, as barley increases to areas, or, moves further and further north to those colder climates that are maintaining, um, you know, what do we think about that? Should we be importing starch from around the world just to make a beverage? Right? I think like I would question brewers for that, to think about the sustainability, particularly if you have a sustainability message in your brewery. Look at your local products. And we're looking at rice, right? Because again, at the top, it's a big agricultural product for the South. But as a Southern brewer, I think this opens the stage for a lot of Southern brewers to maybe access this material than that they might not have thought about. And that would be a challenge that I would have on top of that. Not just distinguish yourself, but distinguish yourself locally with ingredients that that mean something to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So then what challenges and areas of study remain for malted rice? What are you guys looking into in the future? What's next for malted rice?
So there's a lot of questions there. I would say we're barely like scratching the surface with this, but some of them would be, as we were mentioning, like how to further optimize the meshing profile, and seeing like, okay, what are the benefits of each steps, each enzyme usage and everything. So understanding that, it's one big thing. The second, as we're mentioning, like the sensory and understanding all the flavors, colors that it brings. Yeah, and of course to make it a product, so all the commercialization part of it. So seeing, as we were talking before, like, okay, as we upscale this, what are the problems that rise with that? So there's some questions there. Seeing all the brewing, because so far it's all very promising, right? In the brewing trials, like the degree of fermentation were good, some similar to barley. So everything so far has been really promising. So now it's really sort of upscaling and seeing like, okay, as this becomes a product, what are the difficulties that arise with that?
Yeah, for us, I think the next steps are to push this into a larger scale, right? To get it out of the lab, to get into a commercial pilot maltings, let's say, get 500 pounds of this material made. What are the challenges when we get to that scale? And then, taking that malt that's produced, and then let's get it in the hands of some mainstay brewers. Let's see and challenge them to use this material, and to be at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, I don't want to continue to push this, but I like, for the reasons that we've discussed, I think there's a lot of potential here. And again, like Bernardo said, we're just scratching the surface with this. So,
yeah. And so, Scott, sort of on that vein, if you want brewers to take away just one thing from today's episode, what would it be?
I would say just to explore, right? I mean, come into a new area and just listening to people and listening to what the challenges are, exploring this local, rice industry, hearing the pressures from some folks, and then just like getting them excited about, the passion that we have for our beverage, right? I love brewing science. I love this multidisciplinary nature. I love, as I worked with hop farmers. I love getting on the farm. I love hearing from farmers. They are the best observationalists of our time, right? They know their quality better than anybody else. And so it's been fun to go and share my experience in the brewing industry with them. And I hope to continue to learn that. But, as a brewer, go out there, chat with these folks that might have an interesting raw ingredient. That could be a local herb or whatever, right? Like,
yeah.
So,
yeah.
And also I would add to that also, like, as we are talking before, don't limit yourself. We can play with whatever we want to play. So why limiting to just like malt and barley and hops, as we can add like all sorts of starches or herbs or anything really. So
yeah, on that, I mean, like, I think part of me in my development over just the last year, I've realized how much I've been influenced by the Germanic lens, right? Again, that's something that I mentioned previously. And our industry in the US, now we've changed how the global brewing industry thinks about beer. You can't go anywhere in the world without seeing an IPA, right?
Yeah, true.
And so what I'd say is let's continue to be innovators, right? At least, the whole brewing industry should continue to do that and, innovate and make sure that we're maintaining step with climate change, right? That's the other thing. We have this existential crisis coming for us. If we want to maintain this beverage quality that we love so much, right? And I don't want this. I was interviewed from USA Rice, and one of the terms that they used was a replacement for barley. This is not a replacement, right? This is another tool in the toolbox for brewers. That's the way we have to think about it, because it's happening whether we like it or not, right? The temperatures that we're seeing are unprecedented this year already, and we're on another trend for that. So when we think about how, as brewers, we're going to maintain that, right? I know there's a ton of breeding efforts going on for barley right now to address this question and create better barley varieties. But why not look at these other grains that potentially have that capacity, or these other raw materials that do that? So don't mean to end on a downer, but there's a positive light into revisioning or retooling something.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, right? I think we look at rice malt as a potential new ingredient that you can use in brewery, or at least one that, if it's not new to you, it's one that, maybe you haven't thought of using before that you can start to think of. And work from you guys is, furthering this effort, showing that there are different qualities, or there are different varieties of rice out there that still make quality ingredients that are suitable for malting and suitable for brewing. So thank you both for doing this research, and I'm really excited to see the sensory as that comes out, and some of the other research projects that you guys have coming up with respect to rice malt. So Bernardo, thank you so much for joining me in the Brew Lab.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Scott, of course, thanks for coming back.
Cade, always a great conversation. Look forward to the next time.
All right, I'm looking for it too. We'll see you guys then. And listeners, of course, in the show notes, you'll find a link to the article that we talked about on this episode, which is titled "Investigating the Malting Suitability and Brewing Quality of Different Rice Cultivars," published in the journal Beverages in 2024. And next week, Jordan and I will be back applying the science of this episode. See y'all then. The Brew Lab is a production of Brewlosophy, where they who drink beer think beer. Don't forget to visit brewlosophy.com to read about our weekly experiments and other brewing adventures, and listen to us talk about it on our other show, the Brewlosophy Podcast. Thanks to all of our sponsors and patrons that help make this show possible. If you'd like to receive a reward for helping us do what we do, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy to see how you can do just that. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in the Brew Lab with another guest next week. Until then, think beer.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.